And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. Once again, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, same style, in partnership with the Washington Examiner on this Thursday, July 23rd. And indeed, as the great Biff Gore sings, we are making sense out of nonsense, or at least doing our level best to do exactly that. So we've got a sort of a hodgepodge of a show today. I've got some thoughts, a little monologue I want to share with you on Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson from a couple of nights ago. And then I want to share a couple of highlights from Jimmy at the Crossroads interviews with Dr. Marv Trager, a former radical leftist turned conservative Trump supporter, and Keith Nobles, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and recently came on the program to react to a Supreme Court ruling, giving very interesting perspective on this ruling, by the way, but a ruling that said that about half of Oklahoma land is Indian country. Very fascinating. We will share that exchange, some of that exchange coming up in a bit here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. You can also follow me on Twitter at Saying Center. That's saying with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. In addition, like the Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. That's Facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro for the Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality page. And also, follow, like, subscribe, all those good things for our friends at the Washington Examiner on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and, of course, at WashingtonExaminer.com. Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you can also go to JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com where you can access all of our great content. You can watch all of our videos. You can read up on articles and so much more. Plus, that so much more includes the shop and the Crossroads Club membership page. Be sure to check all of that out. So today, I want to begin the program by talking about something interesting that went on between Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson on Tuesday night. During their handoff, every night, Tucker Carlson on Fox News Channel hands off to Sean Hannity for the next show. And in cut two, here is how that handoff went on that includes both Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson.
Beyond our capability. Have a great night. And now, Sean Hannity takes over from New York.
People can make money. They provide goods and services people want, need, and desire. That's America. It's called freedom, capitalism, and as long as it's honest, right? People decide. All right, Tucker, great show. Welcome to Hannity.
That was the handoff. A little slight by Sean Hannity against Tucker Carlson for the previous segment. This was picked up by the Daily Caller. Let's put up pick one. On Twitter, the Daily Caller made this note. Tucker Carlson ended his show by criticizing the fact that Jeff Bezos has gotten richer during the pandemic. Hands off to Sean Hannity, who refutes him. Then here in cut two, Sean Hannity goes ahead and responds. Actually, I think the Daily Caller proceeded to tweet out the full segment that preceded the handoff, and we will show some of that in a moment. But after that tweet, then Sean Hannity puts out this apology on Twitter in pick two. Hannity says, quote, "I apologize for any misunderstanding to Tucker and the Fox audience. I support freedom and capitalism, not people taking advantage of a pandemic. If I see such evidence, I will obviously condemn it." So what was this segment that Hannity was basically critical of during the handoff? Let's take a look here to a couple of parts of this segment, the beginning and the end in cut one.
Coronavirus shutdowns, whether they were necessary or not, have indisputably crushed huge parts of the American economy. Millions of Americans remain out of work. Many more are draining their savings once the government stops paying a huge portion of the population to stay at home. We don't know what will happen. But at least one person has become extremely rich, richer than any man in history, from all of this, including a lot of the suffering. That would be Amazon CEO, Democratic donor, owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, just yesterday, made $13 billion. Now, 20 years ago, if that had happened, if a captain of industry had made $13 billion in a single day while the country got poorer, the Democratic Party would have had something to say about it. Not anymore, because the people getting rich are members of the Democratic Party. Chadwick Moore is not. He's an editor at Spectator USA. We're happy to have him on tonight. Chadwick, thanks so much for coming on. I'm not against wealth accumulation. I'm not against free enterprise. But $13 billion in a day suggests something is skewed with the system, no? Really quick, I was confused when Bezos personally bought a garbage publication like the Washington Post. Now I'm thinking it was pretty smart PR. Buy the paper so you never get criticized.
Well, and it's a cabal, because then the rest of the papers won't criticize them because they're all in the same game together, especially in an election year. So why would they dare criticize the owner of one of their allies to help get their man into office?
One thing about Jeff Bezos, not stupid. I'm not a fan, but you got to say he's pretty smart.
No.
Chadwick Moore, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
So that was not all of that segment that Tucker Carlson did with Chadwick Moore, but Chadwick went ahead after that first part and focused in on the Democratic Party and how they are with these big, wealthy Dem donors and so forth. But what struck me was the language that Tucker Carlson used. Just yesterday, Jeff Bezos made $13 billion during a pandemic. $13 billion in one day shows that something must be skewed with the system. No? So Hannity does his little rebuttal at the end during the handoff. Let's play that one more time. Cut two.
Beyond our capability. Have a great night. And now, Sean Hannity takes over from New York.
People can make money. They provide goods and services people want, need, and desire. That's America. It's called freedom, capitalism, and as long as it's honest, right? People decide. All right, Tucker, great show.
So that's Sean Hannity. And put up his apology one more time, please. Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush Magic, producer extraordinaire. Sean Hannity's apology on Twitter. I apologize for any misunderstanding to Tucker and the Fox audience. I support freedom and capitalism, not people taking advantage of a pandemic. If I see such evidence, I will obviously condemn it. Let me make something clear. If Sean Hannity was going to make an apology, it should have been for rebutting Tucker Carlson without giving him a chance to respond. It should not have been for misunderstanding because he didn't misunderstand a single thing. Tucker Carlson, on a supposedly conservative network, was saying there is something wrong or immoral or unjust or inappropriate or skewed with the system for Jeff Bezos, for his wealth to be increased by $13 billion in a day. Now, keep in mind, this is stock value that we are talking about, which is why I put out this tweet on Twitter. At Sean Hannity, I saw no evidence presented by Tucker Carlson in the preceding segment that Jeff Bezos increased his wealth by $13 billion in one day, surely through his share of Amazon stock, solely by, quote, taking advantage of a pandemic. You were 100% right in what you said. That said, the observation by Tucker and his guest about the Democratic Party today was definitely rather humorous. So Hannity was right in his critique. He was 110% right. This is the market at work. You may not like the idea of somebody getting $13 billion richer from wealth in a day, but Amazon stock, I checked, I think it went up like 10% on Monday. It had a pretty strong day for Amazon on Monday. And that is how Jeff Bezos increases his wealth, because people decided to invest more in Amazon. It's not that he did something corrupt or that he's taking advantage of the pandemic. Why is Sean Hannity sort of genuflecting here to people on Twitter and apologizing for a statement that was right? If anything, an apology could have been said by Sean Hannity. I'm sorry that I made a comment critical of Tucker or critical of a certain viewpoint, making this claim, and he didn't get a chance to respond in kind because it was the handoff to my show. That is something he could have apologized for, if he was going to apologize. Not for misunderstanding. Please, Nathan, put up Hannity's tweet one more time. The thing that is just so perplexing to me, given this, why is it that Sean Hannity is apologizing for misunderstanding when he was absolutely correct? This is the market at work. And by the way, Amazon stock went up, I think, about 6.5% on Monday. But the point is, it went up a sizable amount. And Jeff Bezos was majority shareholder of that company. So, of course, his wealth is going to increase. There's nothing skewed with the system. Amazon, in fact, let me make this very clear. How many of us got through the pandemic without ordering something from Amazon at least a few times? A friend of mine told me his mother's in her 90s. And she had no clue what Amazon was until the pandemic, and then she started becoming a regular customer. Amazon isn't taking advantage of a pandemic. Yes, it's benefiting from the fact that people have to be home and then have their goods and services delivered to them. Amazon is providing people the opportunity to access things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access. Are we going to criticize Grubhub or DoorDash for having more customers buy more services, have more food, having more food delivered to their homes? Nonsense. This is how the system works in capitalism, and it is working exactly right. You may not like Jeff Bezos. I think there's a lot to criticize about the man, but not his business. What he's done, especially during this pandemic, is provide services, provide goods, things to people in need. And his company's done a fine job with that. If he makes $50 billion tomorrow, I won't shed a tear. Instead, I'll cheer. Because I know the value that Amazon has been providing for its customers. And that is not something that we should lose sight of in this country, especially if we value free market capitalism. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. When we come back, we're going to share a couple of highlights from recent editions of Jimmy at the Crossroads. My interview with Dr. Marv Trager, former Marxist radical turned conservative Trump supporter, and with Keith Nobles, Cherokee citizen, where we got his reaction to a recent Supreme Court decision on Oklahoma and Indian country. Keep it right here. Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Hi, Tom. Gee, you look terrible.
I feel terrible. Achy, fevery, nauseous.
Ooh, that's too bad. You know, you ought to...
Chills, stuffiness, bloating.
Yeah, you know...
Scratchy, gassy, drippy.
I know. Say, Tom, you should try Wearaflu.
Wearaflu?
Wearaflu is the only medication that actually takes your flu symptoms and hides them at various places inside your body, so that by the time your body finds them all, your flu is gone. In the meantime, you're back to work.
You were right, Ed. Wearaflu lets me ignore my flu symptoms and gets me back to work. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming in and infecting the rest of the office.
Come out wherever you are with Wearaflu. Take as directed.
Safe, unsafe. Very safe, completely unsafe. Extremely insanely safe. X Games unsafe. Who's there? What do you want?
It's me, Arnold. Don Trump, I need to ask you a favor. I need you to stop using my quotes and my movie titles in your speeches. When you talk to the public, it gives them the wrong idea that somehow I support you.
I can do whatever I want. I am, after all, Commander-in-Chief.
Ah, that's what I mean right there. You can't just blatantly rip people off. That is a movie that I was in, not you, me.
I can do as I wish, as I totally recall.
See what I mean? That was a great movie I did with Jamie Lee Curtis and James Cameron, and neither one of those two support you, and now you're using that. You can't keep on doing this.
That's
it's exactly
media true lie right there.
That's what I mean. You can't say that.
I don't know. Whatever became of us, Arnold? We used to be like brothers, like twins.
That's the last straw. I can't take it anymore. There's something wrong with you. You must have something in your brain.
It's not a tumor.
Ah, that's it. That's it. That's from Kindergarten Cop. You can't steal that.
You know what? You're fired.
You can't fire me. I don't work for you anymore. I quit.
I want you to get Pence on the line right away, Mike Pence. We're going to send him down to Mar-a-Lago, and we're going to put a stop to this Arnold business. Tell him to run. Go. Get to the chopper.
I heard that. Knock it off now, or I'll be back. Unlike you in 2020, I'll be back.
Get him out.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. We're a part. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get you back to Jimmy Sengenberger. He's going to show some best of highlights here on the Crossroads. Mr. Sang style, folks. Here he is.
Welcome back once again to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger. Good to be with you and to share a couple of all-star highlights from our nearly 90 episodes so far of Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner. The first clip we're going to share is an excerpt from a fascinating interview with Dr. Marv Trager, former Marxist radical back in the 60s, turned conservative. He was so far to the left that he was involved in an organization with Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn in the 60s before their Students for a Democratic Society organization split at a major convention at which he was at. Also, we're going to share an excerpt of my interview with Keith Nobles, an American citizen and a Cherokee Nation citizen, where we talked about the practical implications of the Supreme Court's recent decision saying, hey, about half of Oklahoma is Native American territory. Let's roll the tape. So I am so pleased to have on the line today a very special guest, Dr. Marv Trager, who is a retired psychotherapist, PhD, doctorate in psychology. He is also a former Marxist radical who was so far to the left, as we've been talking with him about, that at one point, the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, he and a group of comrades bolted from the Communist Party because it wasn't communist enough. It was communist in name only, not far enough to the left. Well, in this century in particular, he had his roto-rooter process that eroded that leftism and became a conservative, and now is even a strong supporter of President Donald Trump. Marv, it is so great once again to have you here. Thanks for sticking around today and being a part of the program. We really got in the first segment into some depth about understanding some of the identity politics roots on the left and also your own ideological development over time, from being someone who helped Bernardine Dohrn tweak a speech in the 1960s and who was involved in very many different radical movements and so forth back then, on to becoming a conservative now. Today, you might have seen in the news a thing or two about a little bit of civil unrest that's going on in the country today. And there was so much of what you said at a few different points in the first segment that just really resonated with the dynamics today. And I do want to talk about some of these different elements, but I've spoken long enough, so please sort of set the stage here on what your sense is for what we're seeing.
Well, the first thing that I think is worth noting, that I've noted, is that the demonstrations that are going on right now, the protests, the rioting, the looting, have a certain different quality than they did in the 60s, particularly during the civil rights movement. What did a peaceful protest look like in the civil rights movement? Well, you might have 30 people across the front line, maybe Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy and all of the different leaders, and then people behind them and holding signs and protesting, and and then they would have monitors so that the demonstrators monitored their own forces. For the most part, you didn't need the police to monitor it. In fact, the police in the South would attack the march and were the opponents of the march. So when violence erupted, it erupted because of a police attack on a peaceful march. Now, the protesters like to talk about the right of assembly and the right of peaceful protest, and absolutely, that's a proper thing to do. However, what we have in these marches is you have something that, maybe begins and starts like a peaceful protest, but it starts to involve provoking and confronting the police and haranguing the police. And then people start lobbing things from the back and egging on the police to do something, and bricks are thrown and stones are thrown. And then the so-called peaceful protesters they don't try to stop the people who are doing that in the back. They're, that's all, part of them as far as they're concerned. And then as day turns into night, the level of violence steps up, and the afternoon's peaceful protester becomes an evening's violent protester. Now, added to that, you have organized groups like Antifa that generally the left tends to work through mass movements where they lead the mass movements, but they hide their own full program. And but in these, and that's a generalization, but in these demonstrations, you actually have groups with their own specific program, like Antifa, who hide themselves because they're engaged in so much violence, and Black Lives Matter movement, and that movement is led by Marxists. The founder, you can go on the internet and find it, supports Marxism, and was answering a question from an interviewer that said, tell me, what's going to happen to the Black Lives movement? Is it going to disintegrate? Is it going to dissolve once the demonstration? No. We're ideological. We're Marxists. We're trained Marxists, and we're organized. And then another leader of the movement said that with regard to the stained glass windows and statues in Europe, that Jesus's images should be smashed, and this was because Jesus was portrayed as a Caucasian in many of these images, and of course Jesus was portrayed in all sorts of countries, more or less looking like the people of that country, just for the sake of easier identification. But that was enough to want this organization and this guy to destroy
and
those
Marv,
kinds of.
I do have the tweet actually, and for those watching,
Oh,
we're going to
really?
have Nathan Matoush put the tweet up on the screen. This is Sean King, one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and you're right. He was specifically talking about how white supremacy was exemplified in stained glass windows of, quote, white Jesus, and therefore they needed to be taken down. And one of the things that I was expressing the other day is a concern about how they might go for, they've already been tearing down statues. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these people start actually destroying stained glass windows in churches across the country. Now, I hope that's not the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
Don't be surprised.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, when they're destroying statues, so that's what they're doing. Those are objects, right? Symbolic and with great attention, without anybody voting on it or any democratic decision to remove it or anything like that, any discussion. So it's completely undemocratic and it's complete mob rule. But in addition to that, they're engaged in cancel culture through the internet and through pressure on organizations and businesses. Anyone who steps out of line loses their job and is out. So if you're destroying statues and you're canceling the culture of people, pretty soon it will reach the point, it seems to me, when they will start taking out people. I mean, it has to go to that next step at
Marv,
some point along the line.
We have seen some extremists already who have beaten elderly women, for example. Now, I do want to say that I think I talk with a lot of people who believe in Black Lives Matter, are supporters of the cause, but what most people, I think, believe, and even most of the people who show up to these during the day protests, most of them believe, hey, there is racial injustice, there's excessive policing that particularly targets people of color, especially black people, and we need reform. And they genuinely believe that there needs to be change. But then you have this fringe group that has all of this this sense of strength that they can go out there and bring down all the statues or loot property or burn down courthouses and what have you, particularly because they can get away with it. My contention is that those people are less serious about some kind of genuine, at least racial improvement cause, and have either a much more radical agenda, or they're just trying to push the limits to see how far they can go with destroying private property and even public property and eradicating property protection and this notion of property rights, how far they can go before the police will intervene. So I think most of the people who say they support Black Lives Matter genuinely believe that as something sincere but not radical. And then you have these radical elements. However, where there's a rub is the radical and extremists that are destroying property are not only getting away with it because the police aren't acting to stop it, but they're getting away with it because others who say they support Black Lives Matter are, for one reason or another, unwilling to condemn that kind of activity. And I think for most, it's out of fear. But in some cases, you may see some of the more extreme elements who may find themselves thinking, you know what, this is okay with me. Let them do it if they want to.
Well, I don't think that it's very clear what the Black Lives Matter movement and in general, what the reforms that are being sought are.
Right.
As a matter of fact, in most of the cities, remember, all of these cities, just about all of them, are run by the Democratic Party. Atlanta, for example, the police force is 58% African American. The mayor is black. The whole structure of the police chief was also black. And there have been reforms, and you're not finding in those places, and the statistics do not show, like in the number of dead blacks killed by whites versus the number of whites killed by black, police officers and all of that kind of stuff. Pretty much this is not fundamentally a problem anymore.
So it is Free to Choose Friday today, and we are focusing in on the Supreme Court and its impact on American liberty. In the last segment, we talked with a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation to break down a number of cases, and the final case that we delved into was the one called McGirt v. Oklahoma, and we will get to that momentarily with Keith Nobles, who is a good friend of the program. He is author of the novel Our Dogs Did Not Bark, a politically incorrect dystopian tale. Keith is also a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and has some excellent insights to share momentarily in McGirt v. Oklahoma. And Keith Nobles joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Keith, welcome back to the show, my friend. Good to have you here.
Good to be back. How are you?
Keith, McGirt v. Oklahoma. You are a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, so you have a strong interest in this. I know you've been to Oklahoma many times. I want to ask you right off the bat to set the table for us before we get into any opinions and some of the implications. Set the table for us on this decision and what it entails. And I know that this goes back to really gives a couple hundred years of history in the mix.
Yeah, and as you know, I've spoken and written about this very issue for a very long time. So roll back to the Constitution being adopted, roll back to George Washington being the first president. The parts here of the Constitution that are relevant to this case, to this matter, are Article 1, which is the sovereignty of the nations, that Indian nations should be self-governing under the Constitution. And Article 6, which are treaties are the law of the land. So these are the guardrails. George Washington, being the first president, had the first Indian policy, and that Indian policy was he invited Indians into the family. He invited Indians in to become Americans. This is very important. So as a Cherokee, the Cherokee Nation, we were the first tribe to accept this offer. We sent Major Ridge, a prominent Cherokee, to the White House in 1807, and he told Thomas Jefferson, we accept your offer to become Americans. And from that point on, Cherokees clung to being Americans. So this offer extended through the early presidencies, the early administrations, for Indians to become Americans. And this was the American policy. Andrew Jackson revoked that policy, revoked that offer. This is why Indians do not like Andrew Jackson, because Andrew Jackson basically said, I take the offer to become Americans off the table. You cannot be Americans. You can never be Americans, was essentially the message. Okay, so from this point, we deviated from the Constitution in regard to Indians. And it was one bad idea replacing the unintended consequences of the previous bad idea. Well, the relevant piece of this decision yesterday goes back to the Curtis Act that was passed in 1898. And what they tried to do, essentially the Curtis Act tried to abolish Indians as a legal status. That was the essence of it. And in doing that, it basically destroyed tribal governments, the ability to govern yourselves, et cetera, et cetera. What happened yesterday was the Supreme Court ruling that essentially the remnants of that law were unconstitutional. I mean, that's the essence of it. So some of the Curtis Act had been rolled back by Richard Nixon, thankfully. Some of it was rolled back in previous court cases like Harjo v. Kleppe. But yeah, what happened yesterday was significant. It was something I never thought I would see in my life. It was a Supreme Court Justice, Gorsuch, looking at the Constitution, taking it at its word, Article 1 and Article 6, looking at the treaty that was signed, and taking the treaty as word and saying, well, this is what it is. There's no fooling around here. There's no trying to mitigate what it is. And so it was very much a return to the Constitution. We have not seen that in a very, very long time.
Now, Keith, what do you make, though, of the fact that it was Gorsuch aligned with the four liberals on the bench, and you have Clarence Thomas, Justice Alito, Justice Kavanaugh, and Chief Justice Roberts all aligned in opposition and dissenting from this particular decision? Because it was 5-4, but it was interesting lines drawn in terms of the ideological makeup, and you normally would find certainly Justice Thomas on the side of the Constitution. So what makes you think that they were wrong?
Well, so I can tell you here. I think the four justices who sided with Gorsuch probably did the right thing for the wrong reasons. But this is really interesting. And this is what was, I wrote about this at some length when Gorsuch was nominated to the court. Gorsuch understands Indian law. He's well versed in Indian law. He is probably the best versed justice in Indian law that the Supreme Court has seen since the Marshall Court 180 years ago, 190 years ago. Justice Scalia, who I have tremendous respect for, Justice Scalia once said, when it comes to Indian law, we're just making it up as we go. This is, if you're an Indian, this is obviously a very important thing. For 98% of Americans, it's trivial. It's not important to them at all. And really, why should it be? It's not something they deal with or think of. And so from a point of view of judges, there are very few judges who are versed in Indian law, very few judges on the federal bench who have any experience in Indian law. Gorsuch, fortunately, is one of the very few, and he was appointed to the Supreme Court. What Gorsuch did was follow the Constitution, and hats off to him for that. Understanding the intricacies here of what are 190 years of horrible federal policy in regard to Indians and voiding the Constitution. And he took the step back to say, we're going to follow the Constitution here. Whereas John Roberts took a more practical view of, well, these are all the bad things or unintended consequences that could happen from this decision. Gorsuch said, this is what the Constitution says. This is what the treaty says. There's no ambiguity here. This is what we'll do.
Again, Keith Noble's our guest, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads once again. So let's talk about some of the implications of this decision. What does this mean? I mean, as we were talking about with our previous guest, Zach Smith of the Heritage Foundation, legal fellow there, this is particularly narrowly tailored towards criminal law and enforcing criminal laws on the Indian territory and the Indian reservation land that now is about half of Oklahoma under this ruling. So what do you view as the implications of this from a practical standpoint, from specifically what this ruling is about? And then we'll get to some of the implications moving forward.
Okay, so it's even narrower than that, Jimmy. In that it only applies to the 5 tribes. So as I mentioned before, George Washington invited Indian nations in to become Americans. Well, before Andrew Jackson revoked that decision, there were 5 nations that accepted that offer. The Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Creek, who are Muskogee Indians. The 5 tribes. So those 5 tribes are the only people that this decision applies to. There's 39 Indian nations just in Oklahoma. There's nearly 600 throughout the nation. It only applies to those 5 tribes. So it's even narrower than just law enforcement. It's law enforcement for those 5 tribes. But here's what's important, I think. There's a lot of almost hyperbole about what could change here. In practicality, I think very little is going to change. What has happened here since 1907 is that the state has been able to dictate these matters to the 5 tribes. Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Seminole, and Creek. What this decision does is it removes the ability of the state to have to be able to dictate law enforcement matters to these nations. It requires the state and the nations to sit down and negotiate what they're going to do. And so it's a wonderful thing that there'll be cooperation here where there was not cooperation before. And that's a good thing for everyone all the way around. Now, I don't think in practical terms, anything's really going to change here in terms of law enforcement. So, and you're into things that most people have no experience with. But for these 5 Indian nations, they have tribal law enforcement. There is also within their territories, state law enforcement, state police, and then there's local law enforcement for the cities and the counties. Generally speaking, the state, local, and tribal law enforcement, they're already all cross-badged. They're already all cooperating on that level. The only thing here that could change would be the judicial system, and it's highly unlikely that is going to change much. It is probable the tribes will accede to the local courts and the state court continuing to prosecute these cases. But the thing is, they have a voice here. What's been returned to them that the Curtis Act took away is their ability to say no. They have now the ability to say no if they want to.
Well, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday, July 23rd edition of the program. I appreciate it. Sure do encourage you as well to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not done so already, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Log on to jimmyatthecrossroads.com. Join the Crossroads Club exclusive membership program and also shop for some great items at the Crossroads store. My thanks to Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire as well. We'll be back tomorrow with a free to choose Friday edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Have a great day and God bless America.